Dust rolled through the narrow street of red, hollow like a warning from the desert itself. The gallows stood tall in the center of town, its dark wooden beams creaking in the dry wind. People gathered in a silent circle, hats pulled low, whispers passing between them like ghosts. In a place like Red Hollow, justice was often swift, and sometimes terribly wrong. At the center of the crowd stood a young woman with her hands tied behind her back. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Dirt streaked her face, and her once blue dress was torn from the rough ride into town. Yet her eyes burned with a fierce defiance that refused to fade. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She simply stared ahead at the rope hanging from the gallows. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, boots crunching against the dry earth. He was a hard man with a face, carved by years of harsh desert, wines and harder decisions. A silver star gleamed on his chest, catching the morning sun. "Clara Whitmore," he said loudly so the entire town could hear. "You've been found guilty of murdering rancher Edwin Cole. The sentence for that crime is death by hanging." The crowd murmured. Some looked satisfied, others looked uneasy. Clara lifted her chin. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice steady despite the rope swaying above her. "But none of you cared to listen." The sheriff ignored her. "Justice in Red Hollow must be carried out," he continued. 2 deputies stepped forward, grabbing Clara by the arms and leading her toward the wooden steps of the gallows. Just then, the distant sound of hooves echoed through the town. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Everyone turned. A lone rider appeared at the end of the street, riding through the dust like a shadow from the past. His black hat cast his face in darkness, but the way he sat in the saddle told a story of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. The horse stopped near the crowd. The rider dismounted slowly. When he stepped forward, people recognized him immediately. Ethan Cole, a widowed cowboy who lived alone on the far side of the valley. A man who rarely came into town since the death of his wife 2 years earlier. Folks said grief had hollowed him out like an old tree struck by lightning. Ethan walked forward, boots striking the ground with quiet authority. The sheriff frowned. "Ethan, this ain't your business." Ethan's eyes moved to Clara standing beneath the gallows. Something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, or maybe something deeper. Then he spoke. "She didn't do it." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Sheriff Dalton crossed his arms. "And you know that how?" Ethan stopped at the base of the gallows. "Because I know who Edwin Cole was." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Edwin Cole had been known as a wealthy rancher, a respected man, a powerful one, but Ethan's voice cut through the whispers like a knife. He wasn't the man you all thought he was. The sheriff's expression hardened. "You accusing a dead man now?" "I'm telling the truth," Ethan replied calmly. Clara looked down at him, surprised someone was finally speaking on her behalf. Sheriff Dalton shook his head. "That may be your opinion, Ethan, but the law says she killed him. Witnesses saw her running from his ranch. She had his blood on her hands." Clara clenched her fists. "Because he attacked me." But the sheriff raised a hand. "Enough." He nodded to the deputies. "Proceed." The rope was lowered. The deputy placed the rough noose around Clara's neck. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her face. The crowd fell silent. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. "Any last words?" Clara looked across the sea of faces, strangers who had already decided her fate. Then her eyes fell on Ethan, and something unexpected happened. Ethan stepped onto the first step of the gallows. "Stop!" The word wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to freeze everyone in place. Sheriff Dalton stared at him. "You better step down, Ethan." Ethan climbed the rest of the steps. The deputy looked uncertain. "What are you doing?" the sheriff demanded. Ethan removed his hat slowly. Then he said the words that would echo through Red Hollow for years to come. "I'll take her place." The crowd gasped. Clara's eyes widened. "What?" the sheriff barked. Ethan faced him calmly. "You want someone to hang for Edwin Cole's death?" He stepped forward and gently lifted the rope from Clara's neck. "Hang me instead." The entire town erupted in shocked voices. Sheriff Dalton shook his head in disbelief. "You've lost your mind." Ethan's voice remained steady. "No." He turned toward the crowd. "I killed Edwin Cole." Silence crushed the street. Clara stared at him. "That's not true," she whispered. But Ethan didn't look at her. Sheriff Dalton climbed the gallows steps, fury in his eyes. "You confessing to murder?" "Yes." "Why now?" Ethan finally turned his head slightly toward Clara. Because the wrong person shouldn't die today. The sheriff studied him carefully. You understand what you're saying? Ethan nodded once. Perfectly. A long, heavy silence followed. Then Sheriff Dalton turned to the deputies. Remove the rope from the girl. The deputy hesitated, then obeyed. Clara collapsed to her knees, rubbing her neck in shock. The sheriff grabbed Ethan by the collar. You better start talking. Ethan looked out across the crowd. Men, women, children, all waiting for the truth. His voice dropped low. 2 nights ago, I rode to Edwin Cole's ranch. The town leaned closer. I found him trying to force himself on her. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I tried to stop him, Ethan continued. But Edwin pulled a gun. The sheriff frowned. And? Ethan didn't blink. So I shot him first. The crowd gasped again. Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened. You expect me to believe that? Ethan shrugged slightly. Believe what you want. Clara stood slowly. He's lying, she said desperately. He's trying to save me. Ethan finally turned and looked at her fully. For the first time, his voice softened. Maybe. Sheriff Dalton paced the gallows. Then he stopped. You realize what happens next, Ethan? Ethan nodded. Yeah. You hang. Ethan placed his hat on the wooden railing. Then let's get on with it. The town fell into stunned silence as the deputies placed the rope around Ethan Cole's neck. Clara screamed. No, you can't do this. Ethan stood calm beneath the rope. But just before the trapdoor could drop, a voice shouted from the edge of town. Wait! A rider burst through the dust at full speed. The horse nearly slid to a stop beneath the gallows. It was an old ranch hand from Cole's ranch, Samuel. He jumped off the horse, waving a piece of paper. You've got the wrong killer! Sheriff Dalton squinted. Explain yourself. Samuel pointed toward Clara. Edwin Cole had enemies. Plenty of them. He held up the paper. This is a letter Edwin wrote the night he died. The sheriff grabbed it and read. His expression changed. Slowly, dangerously, he looked up at Ethan, then at Clara, then back at the crowd, and said words no one expected. Cut him down. The rope was removed. Ethan stepped off the gallows. Sheriff Dalton turned toward the town. Looks like Red Hollow almost hanged the wrong 2 people today. The crowd erupted in stunned murmurs. Clara looked at Ethan. Why would you do that? Ethan picked up his hat. His voice was quiet. Because someone once did the same for me. And with that, he walked back toward his horse. But what no one in Red Hollow knew yet was that Edwin Cole's death was only the beginning. Because the letter revealed a secret that would soon turn the entire town upside down.